On Yom Kippur, the Torah portion is a piece from Leviticus in which Aaron has to make atonement, having after his children went too close to the presence of God and were killed. He had to atone, and the portion focuses on his being told to get 2 goats from the Israelite community and then draw lots. So there's a moment of chance about which goat goes where. One is offered up as a burnt sacrifice to God, and one is sent out to what is called Azazel, which is the wilderness, and it becomes known as the scapegoat, in which all of the sins of the entire Israelite community are put upon that goat, and it's presumably left to die, but you don't really know where it goes, right? What's interesting to me about the text is that Aaron also makes a personal offering from his personal goat herd, so there's this personal sacrifice, personal tshuva and atonement that goes on, as well as a moment of catharsis of sorts for the entire community's sins to go out on this goat. And it is my great pleasure to be here with award-winning journalist and author Jacob Soboroff, an NBC News correspondent and the author of the book Separated: Inside an American Tragedy. Jacob, I'm so glad to be in conversation with you today, because when I first revisited the scapegoat story this year, your book came to mind. I mean, it's a harrowing tale of the recent situation in the southwest border of the United States, and some really aggressive moves in administration and immigration policy. The current understanding of the word scapegoat is different than the one in the Torah portion that we reckon with. So I'm really curious, just to kick it off and see where you are this year on your journey with this Torah portion and all of your incredible reporting of the last few years and how it connects for you.
Well, thanks, Brina. And this is my greatest journey with any Torah portion since my bar mitzvah, I have to admit to you. So I'm glad we're doing this. The idea of the scapegoat is something obviously that resonates very deeply with me in covering the plight and the mistreatment and, frankly, the torture, in the words of Physicians for Human Rights, the Nobel Peace Prize winning organization, of immigrants, migrants, and refugees at the border by the Trump administration. And just look, what I experienced, what I saw with my own eyes, seeing separated children held in a former Walmart, 250,000 square feet, allowed outside 2 hours a day. A couple days later, seeing the kids in cages at the McAllen Border Patrol processing station, Ursula, they call it. These children, and now we're talking about over 5,400 of them, were made to suffer because of, honestly, we don't know why. We don't know why, because of politics. And when we talk about scapegoats, I'm not sure there is a better example or story or allegory when I look at what happened and what I witnessed with my own eyes. And I'm glad we're talking about this, because that's why I wanted to write the book too, to dig deeper, to learn more about how us, America as a country, got to the point where these children were subjected to government-sanctioned child abuse, in the words of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I think scapegoat is the perfect way to look at it. The Trump administration, and frankly, previous administrations before that, Democrat and Republican, used immigrants as others to further ultimately what were political goals. And the results, we should all reckon with, have been really disastrous.
Really disastrous. And, 2 things struck out reading your book recently, because of course, I lived in the United States. I watched the news as it was unfolding, and you're reporting it in real time, but to then read it as one story this year. 2 things. One is the policy was really about deterrence, which I hadn't realized you crystallized in your book. There was a choice to start separating families in order to send a message to people outside this country that they should not come here. And that was so stark and again, exacerbates the othering and the scapegoat narrative that we've seen in politics in so many different ways, going back for a while now, but really it's just so harsh. But then at the same time, your book really crystallized for me that these are the detention centers you were at were for people seeking asylum. This is not a conversation about people who come here to work, which I'm all for also, but for people fleeing persecution and who are refugees, which we've taken to calling migrants in this story, but they're refugees. And where where's the language and what are we doing with that revelation?
It's such a good point. And I know we're talking about the Torah, but if I could talk about the Bible for a minute as well. I remember Reverend Al Sharpton, obviously the activist, but also my colleague at MSNBC, delivered the eulogy for George Floyd, in the middle of this pandemic, as the nation's attention turned to issues of racial justice. And the story that he talked about during the eulogy was the idea of a rejected stone becoming the cornerstone. George Floyd not being a perfect person, but becoming the example that we should lift up and we should talk about when it comes to justice. And I saw a great parallel, both to the scapegoat Torah portion that you're talking about, the example of the scapegoat in the Torah portion, but also in Juan and Jose, the father and son that I write about in the book, because Juan came to this country, and he freely admitted to me multiple times before he came here with Jose, his son, and were separated. And when he came here, he came as an economic migrant. He came here to make money for his family and go back to Guatemala. And ultimately, when he did come here, fleeing narco violence, it was then that he was separated. They were kept apart for nearly 5 months. He was coerced into signing away the right to his child. And were it not for an amazing lawyer, Lindsay Kozlowski, here in Los Angeles, they probably wouldn't have been put back together, and he would have been one of those 400 plus parents deported without their children. And I say all this because Juan's story wasn't perfect. It wasn't that example that everybody wants to hold up as this immigrant who has a clean record or ended up going to Harvard and becoming a scientist or whatever. He's just a normal guy. And where I think we need to really focus on is what the government did to these folks, no matter who they are, where they came from, what their background was. This is a story about the United States government perpetrating violence, both physical and emotional, upon the bodies of these refugees. And I think one day we're going to look back, when we talk about scapegoating and others and othering, on the separation of children from their parents by the Trump administration, and what got us to this point, in line with the other ignoble moments in American history, Native American genocide and slavery and Japanese internment and the turning away of the St. Louis. I mean, I'm talking about how we should think of this in the broader context. I'm not saying or comparing specifically to these other events, but this is who we are, I'm sorry to say.
And I'm curious to ask you, so what part of what it sounds like in your book moves you to write this story is to catalog what it felt like to be the one who was bearing witness, who was reporting these facts and uncovering them on the ground. But it also seems like you've wrestled a little bit with where the line is as from being a reporter to being a person telling a story and living it in real time. How has that experience been to you, and where do you sit with that now?
I think maybe that's a controversial thing to say as a reporter, but I don't believe in neutrality. I just don't. We all come to our lived experiences or events through our lived experiences, right? Who we are, where we came from. I'm undeniably a person who is white and privileged and grew up in Southern California and went to private school, and I'm Jewish, and the list goes on and on. Like, I'm probably, I'm certainly not the best person to tell the story of 5,400 Central American refugee children being taken away from their parents, but it just so happened that I ended up there. And I'm also a father of 2 young kids, and was a father of a young kid at the time that I was down there. And credit to my bosses at NBC, who never said to me, don't do this because you come to this with a set of experiences and you have opinions about it. This happened, and you were there, and you saw it through your eyes, and tell us what you saw. And I believe, as a journalist, it's possible to both have opinions, but also to be fair. It's not unfair to describe cages as cages. It's not unfair to say the Trump administration was doing something unprecedented and cruel when it was doing something unprecedented and very obviously cruel. It was backed up by experts. And so, I've learned a lot about being a reporter in doing this story, because this wasn't always the type of stuff that I did. I've learned that I shouldn't be the only voice telling this story. And I read in the book at the very beginning that there are over 5,400 stories about what happened, and they each should be told, and they each should be listened to. And there are other journalists who were at this before I was. And there are experts and advocates and people who had much more direct skin in the game before I ever showed up on the scene. But it doesn't mean we should turn away. It doesn't mean we should hide the way that we feel about things. Mine is just one story of many, and I just try to be as honest as I could about that.
And there's something really powerful and important, both for the historical record, as you're saying, and for these ethical and moral questions we have to deal with, in particular around these moments of atonement and this annual cleansing we do, about what it means to have been the ones to have seen this, and what stories get recorded, and what atrocities we face. And I've had a lot of conversations in the last few years, living under the current American regime and situation, what it means to be a Jew, a child of immigrants, and someone who was raised with a heritage that was really keen on telling our own stories, trying to learn from our past, certainly never forgetting our past, and from moments of persecution. And there's, at the same time, being a white person in America, and not all, but many in our Jewish community are white too, and have been afforded certain privileges and absolutions of sorts because we were raised to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of the refugees and those who were persecuted, because that's what so much of our history is. But that's not who we are in your story, right? Or in Juan and Jose's story, or I as the reader of your book, or the observer of these immigration policies. And where does that leave us in terms of what we can do, both to expiate our sins going past, to perform teshuvah and atone, and be, ethical Jews and citizens going forward?
It's exactly why I named the book Separated Inside an American Tragedy, because that's exactly what this is. This is a tragedy that's on all of us, that was done in all of our names. And me, I hope, in the book, am a stand-in for many of the folks who are watching us talk right now. And what I learned in the research and the reporting for the book is that it's really easy to go after Donald Trump for separating thousands of children seeking refuge in the United States from their parents. But it's a lot harder to reckon with the fact that both Democrats and Republicans made this possible. Where I think this really started was with Bill Clinton in 1994, Prevention Through Deterrence, where he made migrants choose between going through hostile terrain, basically a life or death situation, or staying home in these desperate situations that they were fleeing. And then George W. Bush starts DHS post 9/11, expands the Border Patrol exponentially. Barack Obama deports more people than any president in the history of the United States, and builds the facilities that had the cages that Donald Trump put the separated children into in response to a surge of Central American migrants in 2011, 2012, 2014, 2016. So the fact Donald Trump was able to do this is because none of us were paying attention. I said none of us. It's not true. I mean, immigration advocates and lawyers fought incredibly hard against President Obama and his policies, and all the other administrations. But a lot of the people today who fancy themselves part of the resistance, I think, had no clue, and frankly, no intention of ever standing up to this type of thing until Donald Trump became president of the United States. And I think that was a big mistake. People are wrong when they send me the photos of Jay Johnson, Obama's DHS secretary, walking outside of the cages saying Obama started this separation policy. He didn't. But they're right to say he built the cages to house the children that Donald Trump ultimately put in those cages. Look, these are not black or white, either or conversations to have. They're nuanced. They're very policy oriented. But we have to have them. Otherwise, you're not going to understand how the United States was able to torture 5,500 children easily.
In terms of reflecting on what we need to atone for as Americans in this moment, or as part of this community, it's a glimmer of hope and inspiration too, to think about how any one person's actions, I mean yours too, in reporting, can in fact make a big impact on where things are headed, right?
I really honestly do not believe that I probably deserve negative credit, because as you read about in the book, I missed this at many different key inflection points. Like, I was covering the border and did not see it coming. But what you made me just think of is actually a conversation I had with Juan and Jose, Juan specifically after the book came out, when I was down in Yuma covering President Trump's visit to the border. And he said to me, if you see President Trump, because they don't let me anywhere near him, but I was there to cover the visit nevertheless, ask him why he separated us and why he traumatized us psychologically. And that was one of many conversations that I've had with him about all of this. And people watching will be very familiar with the phrase "never again," and that's that Juan and Jose participated in this book with me because we shared that goal to find out how this happened to them. He asked me that question again when I was with President Trump or at the Trump visit, how it happened to them, and to make sure that it doesn't ever happen to anybody else. And so I think it's okay. It's okay to admit that we don't know and that we were wrong and that we allowed this to happen, but also to be resolved that that we can't let this happen to anybody else. Anybody with a shred of a moral compass needs to have the courage to call out people of both political parties for getting us to this point. And should there be a new administration, keep the pressure on the Biden administration so the treatment of refugees and migrants stays front and center. Absolutely.
And I think, part of what I've always liked about the high holidays and this opportunity to focus on atonement, it's a forced meditative retreat. It really, the structure of Yom Kippur and of the days of awe before is to, force you to lean into the sharp points, reflect on what you've done for the year, go to all the hard places you don't want to go. I think the scapegoat story does a little bit of that for me, right? We have to excavate all of our sins and put them out there. And then we do have the opportunity to start a clean slate and do it all again. And the risk there is that we turn away too soon, right? And we don't fully account for where we've been and fully repent. But there is something empowering that if we do, we can come out stronger for it, right? And I think there's something incredible about your reporting for us all to reckon with about where we were and what we did or didn't see, and then how we want to be treating families coming to this country going forward.
Well, I mean, it's true. I had never thought about this before, but this book is my Yom Kippur. I mean, it was a year of learning about how I was wrong, and how I wonder if in all my reporting and all the time leading up to this, I had known more or thought more critically or differently or looked a little bit deeper, maybe I could have made a difference. I'll never know. And maybe the answer is no. But it's worth all of us sort of going through that thought exercise, I guess. And that's what this book really was for me, not necessarily just a thought exercise, but I mean, really going back and exploring the facts on the ground, what I saw as a reporter, and where I could do better next time.
Wow. That's really beautiful, Jacob. And seems like a great place for us to wrap up. So thank you for all that you've done and continue to do. Wish you and your family a very happy and healthy New Year.
Same to you, Brina. Thank you very much.